This is Tamiko Brooks, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for scriptwriting information in print and on the web. And by Final Draft scriptwriting software, the entertainment industry standard for scriptwriting worldwide. My name's Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 28 for Monday, July 11th, 2011. Today, I'm so excited to bring you an interview with writer Tamiko Brooks. More about her later, but first, the news. I want to remind you about our homework, which is really pending, and that is Elephant Bucks by Sheldon Bowl. I'm going to be actually interviewing Sheldon this week, so I want to make sure that you get your questions in by July 17th. For Sheldon, you can send them to mail@tvwriterpodcast.com. And just a reminder, Elephant Bucks is all about sitcom writing, and Sheldon actually knows a lot about other types of writing as well, and the book is helpful not only for sitcoms, but primarily the book is about sitcoms, so if you are at all interested in sitcom writing, make sure that you get that book as soon as possible. If you haven't gotten the book already, you can get it from the tvwriterpodcast.com site. There's a store link at the top that takes you to a little mini store that's got a lot of great writing books, including Elephant Bucks. There are some great prices, and every book you buy there helps your shelf and also helps support the podcast. So urge you to do that. Another thing is Sunday nights. Take part in the TV Writer Chat. It's been very, very cool. It's just a frenzy of fun. 6:30 p.m. PST, 9:30 p.m. EST. You can get the details for that at tvwriterchat.com. You just go on Twitter and use the TV Writer Chat hashtag, or else if you go to tvwriterchat.com, there's a link that takes you to a chat room that automatically enters that hashtag and makes it a little easier to follow. But definitely take part in that. It's for 1 hour every Sunday night. And one great reason to take part in the chats is that next Sunday, not this week, but Sunday, I guess that would be July 17th, we're going to launch the first TV Writer Podcast contest, and it'll be launched at the TV Writer Chat. There's some amazing prizes to be won. I'm just securing the last few prizes this week, but there are some really cool ones already. So definitely you want to take part in that contest. It's going to be running for, at this point, I think it's going to be about 4 weeks. And if you want to get a jump on it, you got to log on to the TV Writer Chat on Sunday night. The TV Writer Twitter database has now reached 730 writers, and it continues to climb. Make sure to check it out at tvwriterpodcast.com. And one writer you can definitely follow on Twitter is me. @GrayJones is my handle. And now, a bio on writer Tamiko Brooks. Tamiko Brooks hails from Detroit, Michigan. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Columbia College, Chicago. After graduation in 1996, Tamiko headed west to LA and got a job as an assistant on the TV sitcom Moesha. Under the mentorship of some of the writers, Tamiko began writing spec sitcoms and ultimately received her first writing credit in 1999 with an episode of Moesha. Soon after, Tamiko became a recipient of the newly created Nickelodeon Writing Fellowship. She became the first live-action TV fellow and was relocated to Orlando, Florida to work on the Nickelodeon sitcom Taina. Around this time, she wrote a freelance script of The Proud Family. And another milestone was reached in her career when Tamiko became an ABC Disney Writing Fellow. As a result, she was placed on the sitcom 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter. The head writer was so impressed with her that he hired her on staff. She was with that sitcom for 2 seasons until its cancellation, and then she was hired as a writer on Half and Half. And additionally, she's written freelance scripts for the daytime drama One Life to Live, and she has a lot of great tips about the industry and how to navigate it. So I think you're going to love this interview. You can follow Tamiko on Twitter @Tamiko Brooks. Very easy to remember. Anyway, without further ado, here we go with my interview with Tamiko Brooks. Enjoy. This is Gray, and I'm here with writer Tamiko Brooks. How you doing, Tamiko?
I'm good. How are you, Gray?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. I think it will be a very, very informative interview and really helpful for people to hear about your path through the industry.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so as we always do, we go way back to the beginning, and I know that you hail actually pretty close to where I'm right now, from Detroit, Michigan. So what was it like? What was it like growing up there? And I know in your bio you said that you were interested at a very early age in TV and film.
I was. I wasn't, being from Detroit, you never think that, the way you're going to go is to Hollywood to write or, direct movies or television. But on a smaller scale, I just used to always write as a child, like stories, short stories, poems, just any writing. I was the nerd in class who, when the teacher assigned us like 500 words a story as a punishment, I was happy. Like everybody else in class was sad, but I was like, yes. And so I was that kid. And also I was like, probably shouldn't say this, but raised on television, like all the classic sitcoms and things like that. Like we were a family watching television. And so, so that was a good thing, to me. That wasn't a bad thing. So anyway, growing up in Michigan, like even going to school for it, I went to like school for communications or things like that. I knew that I wanted to write in some kind of way, maybe be a journalist, but I wasn't really making the connection to television yet. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't really until, and I would just have to say Spike Lee, I guess. Well, starting earlier on, I used to watch the old black and white movies with my mom when they used to come on TV before, like, AMC. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God, I'm telling my age. But, when old black and whites would come on television, my mom and I would sit and watch them. And I just remember watching Night of the Hunter and just loving that movie for some reason, and just thinking, like, okay, like, thinking about movie ideas now in terms of not just, stories or, novels, but movie ideas. And then when I saw Do the Right Thing when I was in high school, and, Spike Lee, wrote and directed and whatever, and that it really hit me that, like, people do that, like, people really like go to film school and write and direct movies. And so after that, I just knew that I was going to film school. Yeah. And I kind of went about it in an odd kind of way, because I first went to Michigan State. I guess I didn't want to travel too far away from home. So I went to Michigan State. But I was excited about going there because two writers, oh my God, I'm blanking on their name. Jim Cash is one, and I can't remember his partner's name, but they wrote a lot of great films in Hollywood, but they were professors at Michigan State. Wow. And I knew that they were there. Like, I got to check IMDb really quickly and get their names. But I knew that they were there, and I was like, maybe I'll have a class of theirs. But I also knew that Sam Raimi had ties to Michigan State, and so I was just, I knew I had to go there and start in communications and just see what happened from there. But unfortunately, money woes and things like that, I needed to make a change and come back home. But I always still had film school on the brain, and I ended up going to Columbia College Chicago, which was a film school that I found all my own. It just hit me one day. I was like, you know what? I am going to film school. I made an appointment to go visit administrations there. I booked my flight. This is really the first time I'm doing this all on my own. It's like a 20-something-year-old kid, I'll say, at the time. But, I told my mom, I booked a flight to Chicago. I'm going to Columbia College. She's like, what? And I was like, yep, I'm going there for the day, check out the school. So I went to check out the school, talk to the administration, and, next thing I knew, I was signing up for enrollment. So that's where I went to film school, and I'm glad I did. I was finally the, movie TV nerd who was around other movie TV nerds, because, unfortunately, being in Detroit, being a movie TV nerd, you get teased a lot because nobody thinks that's a viable, option for you, for your future. They're like, oh, whatever, you're not going to write movies, you're not going to write for, So finally I was around my brethren at Columbia College. So
Now tell me a little bit about that program, because that would have been, I guess, early 90s.
Yeah.
I went to film school in early 90s as well, and my impression, and other people that I've talked to, is that especially at that time, it was film. There was very little TV. It pretty much anywhere. Like even people I talked to that went to USC, there was so much more of a focus on features. What was it like there?
I was in the film program, so it was all film. Like I went for screenwriting and directing. That's what I was there for. Mm-hmm. So my entrance into television didn't really happen until I moved to LA. So, but going back to Columbia College before I get there, that was just a great experience for me because like one of my teachers at the time, he was a great teacher. Every student loved him. Mm-hmm. He'd worked in Hollywood for 30 years. His name is Bob Henrietto. He really like shepherded a bunch of kids to move to Los Angeles after they graduated. And so like to this day, like we'll call ourselves Bob's kids. Wow. He was one of the guys responsible for getting Columbia College Chicago on site at CBS Radford. Wow. Like they have a building on site at CBS Radford where interns from Columbia College in Chicago come and they work in the industry and take classes here, and either they stay here or go back to Chicago to finish up school or whatever. But he was the brain child behind that. But before that program came along, it was just once you graduate, pack up and move to LA. So I caravanned across country with some fellow graduates of mine, and came from Chicago to LA.
Wow! And when was that?
That was in 1996. I'm really telling my age here.
Hey, don't worry. I'm telling mine too. I did virtually the exact same thing. Well, for me it was across Canada, coming to Toronto, and graduated in '94. So. Hey,
okay.
Don't worry about that. But so you headed west to LA, and pretty soon I think you got a job on how do you even say it? Moesha. Mm-hmm. It was a UPN sitcom starring Brandy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really where my introduction to television came, because again, when I was at Columbia, all I thought about was film school. Mm-hmm. And was film, writing for films, and directing too, but I never really branched out into that once I moved here. But so I got a job as an assistant on Moesha. Mm-hmm. And it was my first job in the industry. It was a job on a television show. I was happy to have it. It was fantastic. And the first year I was an executive assistant, assistant to the executive producer. My second year on the show, I became a writer's assistant, and that's what really opened up the world of television writing for me. I was new to LA. I had 3 roommates at the time, so there were 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment, but those were the roommates who came with me from Chicago, from Columbia College. So we were all like artists, and so when I would come home, we would most of the time be in the living room talking about story ideas or things like that, or woes of the industry or whatever. So when I became a writer's assistant on Moesha, watching the writers sit around a table and break story reminded me of what I did at night when I was at home with my roommate. And so I got the idea of that's television writing, They're breaking story. It's that's what I do at home anyway. Why can't I think about television, because I'd only previously thought about features. And so yeah, working on that show and then, making great friends with the writers who were on that show. There, one year, the Nickelodeon Fellowship came up for the very first year of the Nickelodeon Writing Fellowship. And one of the writers, Fred Johnson, one of the producers, he told me and a bunch of other assistants about it. And the first thing I remember saying was, I don't know. And he looked at me and he goes, that sounds like fear to me. And I was like, oh, really? Well, maybe it does sound like fear. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to write something. I'm going to enter it into that. And so I wrote a Friends spec script, actually, the television show Friends. Yeah. I wrote a spec script of that, and I got into the Nickelodeon Writing Fellowship with that. Very cool. Now, did you know Courtney Lilly?
I did. We were both in the same time. We were he was the first animated fellow, and I was the first live action TV fellow.
Wow, very cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so now you actually from that went to, was it Miami or Orlando?
Orlando.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm showing my ignorance a little bit, but I didn't know that they shot TV shows in Orlando.
Yeah, well, at the time, Nickelodeon used to shoot most of their, I believe, they used to shoot most of their live-action television shows in Orlando, Florida.
Really?
Like right next to the Universal Studios amusement park down there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they flew me down. Most of the show I worked on was called Taina.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the writers and crew were coming from New York. So here I am, never meeting anybody there yet, but coming onto their, staff as a fellow. Mm-hmm. But luckily, I happen to know one of the writers because he had come and pitched to Moesha when I was assistant there for a long time. So I happened to know him, and then, I just met the other writers in the crew, and I worked there for a total of 13 episodes, where most of the episodes were written, so there was an opportunity for me to write an episode, but I got to be in on, every week's worth of production and run-throughs and pitching jokes and, rewrite for Stu or anything like that. So this was the first time I really felt like a part of the writing staff.
Now, you also around that time, or maybe a little bit before, you actually wrote a freelance episode of Moesha as well?
Yes. Well, when I was at Moesha, the very first credit I have is actually a freelance episode that they gave to the writer's assistants. It was myself and two other people, and they let us do a freelance episode.
Oh,
and
cool.
So that was all of our very first writing credit.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
And then by the time you were on Taina, that was it was kind of like you were a staff writer, but not necessarily writing individual scripts.
Right. Yeah, I was a fellowship writer, you could say. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So, and then also around that time, you did a freelance script for The Proud Family.
I did. After my Nickelodeon fellowship ended, and still, going on with my writing career, one of the producers and some of the other writers that I used to know at Moesha, they had moved on to an animated show that was now on the Disney Channel called The Proud Family. And they were taking pitches for freelance episodes. And so I went in and pitched, and I got an episode. And so that was the episode that I wrote for that show.
Very, very cool. Now, at that point, you also were a Disney writing fellow, ABC Disney. How did that come about?
That came about because, and here's my little crass joke, but back at the time, if there was a fellowship or a contest or anything to enter, I was going to enter it. So I termed myself the fellowship hoe. And I was going to enter anything out there for writers and scripts and things like that. And you know what? I'm somewhat still a fellowship hoe because I'll still enter any contest or pitch fest or anything like that. But I applied for the Disney Fellowship. I had previously applied and got rejected, but that kind of only fuels me to try again. Yeah. So, well, they must not know how good I am yet, so I'm just going to show them one more time.
Was that after The Proud Family? Because I would imagine if it was you said it was a Disney show, so I guess that would have helped.
Yeah, you know what? The Disney Fellowship was after my Proud Family episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, I entered into the Disney Fellowship for a second time, and this time I got in.
Very cool. So maybe you could contrast those two fellowships, because I don't know too many people I know there are people who have done more than one, but I think you're the first person that I've talked to that has actually done more than one fellowship. So maybe tell me a little bit about how the Nickelodeon, what it was like to go through that one, and then contrast it with the Disney one.
The thing that I'll say about both fellowships, I loved going through both fellowships. I loved going to Florida and working on Taina was fantastic. The only thing I think about the Nickelodeon fellowship was that I was involved in the very first year. So they sent me to Orlando to work on Taina, and after that, I worked with executives, but it didn't seem like there was any placement beyond that. So that was, you know, the end of my fellowship with Nickelodeon.
So it was kind of to get you, it got you sort of in the room for that first show, and then after that, it's kind of, see ya, the rest is up to you kind of thing? Yeah,
you know, actually, almost everything is like that. I mean, that's the nature of the industry. The rest is up to you. So you really just have to get the experience while you can, and, you know, have a great time with it, and just try to figure it out after that. So
well, and it sounds like even at that point, I mean, it's still pretty early in your time in LA, but it sounds like you were networking a lot with people you had worked with, both networking with the people that you were in Chicago with, and networking with the people that you were on Moesha with, and so I know that definitely is a huge part of it. In any of those sort of organized things that you do, or getting into a staff of a show, is trying to build those relationships.
Yeah, that absolutely is a huge part of it. You know, you definitely have to build relationships, keep in touch with the people, writers or executives or anything that you've met, and, you know, just keep it going yourself. It's definitely you keeping up with your writing and keeping the relationships going. Because, you know, there's always a new crop of kids coming out every year who want to write in the industry. So there's always, you know, more writers to meet, more executives and everything. So.
So then tell me about the ABC Disney Fellowship, and how was that like?
That was a great experience also. You know, first of all, the ABC Disney Fellowship is kind of the royalty of fellowships in LA. So that's definitely one that a lot of writers I know aspire to. So just being in that was an amazing experience. And also, they bring in so many different writers for you to sit down and talk to and meet. Like, you know, I had the opportunity to speak with Stephen Bochco and Gary Marshall, and just a ton of the showrunners, past and present. I mean, you know, just to, like, sit at a table and learn from these other, you know, creative forces who've done so many things is really inspiring. And so not only that, you get assigned to an executive and you pitch your story ideas to them. So you really have to, you know, hone your pitching skills, and you have to take notes very well. And, you know, but luckily, being a writer's assistant in the past, you know, I was able to see how writers in the room handled notes and rewrites and things like that. So I knew that it was just a part of the business and not something to take personally if someone didn't, you know, get a pitch or, you know, like a joke or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just a part of the creative process. So, yeah, the Disney Writing Fellowship was just really another way to just reinforce all those skills and meet with other executives. And one thing that they try to do every year is place their fellows on ABC or Disney shows. And I was fortunate enough to get placed on Agent Rule that season.
Wow. I mean, that must have been an incredible experience.
Yeah, incredible is an understatement.
Wow.
Well, you know, I was fortunate enough to be able to meet and work with, for very briefly, John Ritter, who was such a nice man when I met him.
Yeah.
He was so nice and so welcoming, and, you know, don't be nervous, he would say to me, you know, but just jokingly, he was really, really nice. And unfortunately, he passed away, like, just right when I started on the show. So,
wow.
But being a part of that process, you know, just watching how the producers and writers, like, kind of really reshaped the show and you know, try to honor his memory with the upcoming scripts and take the show into, a different direction. That was just something to watch as a writer, of my, status at the time. Just to sit there and see that.
Yeah. Now, you were with that sitcom for 2 seasons, though, right?
Yes. So it was great because after my first season, the showrunner, like the first season I was on the show, I was staffed as a fellow. And then I stayed along with the show, and the showrunner liked me and liked me being there and decided that he wanted to keep me. So ABC subsidized, I think, the rest of my salary until I could stay on the show. And then for the following season, I was hired onto the staff, like just from the staff budget, not a fellow anymore, but as a staff writer on the show for the next season.
Cool. Very, very cool. And so then very unfortunate that show ended as it did. And I think you got pretty quickly onto Half and Half after that?
Yeah, the following season I was staffed onto Half and Half, which I was joining the show in its 4th season, I believe it was. But that was fantastic because I got to work with a woman who I'd always known in the industry for, creating shows like Living Single, which I absolutely loved growing up. And that's Yvette Lee Bowser. So I was able to work on that staff and just work with the cast and the writing staff that I loved. So it was really great, but unfortunately that was the year that the UPN and the WB merged. And so a lot of shows got canceled because of that, and Half and Half was one of those.
So I know that IMDb often has gaps, and after that, there's not a lot listed. But then I also know that was the time of the writer's strike, which really, really hit the industry hard. So tell me a little bit about what you did after that point.
After that point, it's just I have to remind myself that, I'm a writer, whether I'm getting paid for it or not, as long as I'm writing. So, so those are the times in which, I just did my own writing, did my own quote unquote hustling, meeting, independent producers on my own, pitching things on my own. And, still being in the business without technically still being in the business. Those are the times when, like you said before, the people you have worked with before and networked with before really help. I also got an opportunity to do a few freelance scripts for One Life to Live at that time. But that's because one of the executives that I met through my ABC connections was in daytime programming. And I loved daytime soaps. I do. I grew up on them, I can't help it.
Oh, yeah.
So I sent my material over to this executive, and he read it. He responded to it. He was coming to L.A. for a week, I think, or for a short amount of time, and he just, wanted to meet with me. So we met briefly, and, I talked to him about how much I loved the daytime dramas, and he liked my work. So at the time, I'm not sure if it's still going on now, especially with the state of daytime dramas at ABC, but they had an ABC daytime drama program, and it's basically where you can write a freelance for them or write a spec for them, and they'll see if they want to bring you on under a trial contract to write 3 more. So I wrote a spec of One Life to Live. And the way it works is that you don't just write a spec, they send you something, because I didn't even know how daytime worked. So it was really interesting to see how this whole process worked. They send you kind of like an outline, which is the way they work is they have some writers who write just outlines, and then they send those outlines out to write the dialogue in the scene. So they send you an outline, and you have to write the dialogue in the scene. So I did that, and it was well received, and they liked it, so they decided to give me the trial contract to write 3 episodes.
Very cool.
But it was great, but wouldn't you know it, the strike happened after that. Yeah, after I turned my first one in, I think. So we were on strike for a long while, and there was no work that could be done. And once the strike ended, I did finish out my trial contract, but there was just no room on staff or for any other writers. So, but I got to write those 3 episodes, so I was happy with that.
Very cool. Well, and I think I remember the strike very, very vividly, as I'm sure we all do. And one of the things that I remember at that time was that people outside of the industry were so confused because they said, well, I hear how TV writers make so much money. Why are they complaining? There's so many channels. There must be so much work. Why are they complaining? And in particular, the people were confused. Why are they trying to get more money? And I remember the Writers Guild even putting out some numbers at the time and saying, hey, listen, we might have 8,000 members, but at any one time there's only 2,000 or 3,000 that are working, like a small percentage that are working. And so I think for people who are coming into the industry, it's very important to have a bit of a reality check to say, sure, there are people making $500,000 a year in writing on popular shows. There are also people who go 2 or 3 or 4 years without working, and that's totally normal. Like very successful writers can go 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years without working, or at least without being staffed. Like everybody's writing specs, they're writing freelance scripts, they're maybe developing pilots, things like that, and you might get dribs and drabs of pay from those. But even like successful showrunners, like there's a few showrunners that I've talked to about doing an interview on the podcast, and they're very open to doing an interview, but they said, listen, I'm not working right now, and I'd like to talk to you when I'm working. And these are guys who have created several shows, and yet, and so, I mean, if a showrunner who's created several successful shows can be a year or 2 not working, then it's going to happen to everybody. So, I think it's very valid to talk about some of the strategies that we need to take. I mean, certainly one of them is financial planning, and having having a plan B for income, networking, which I see is something that you're continuing to do very actively. But what would you say are some of the things that people need to know coming into the industry about, and particularly when you're breaking in, your work is probably going to be inconsistent. So what are some of the strategies that you've learned along the way?
You know, for writers, the biggest strategy is just to keep writing and surround yourself with other writers who are writing. You know, fortunately for me, I have my friends who were in the Disney Fellowship with me, and we get together periodically in terms of a writers group, and it's so helpful. It's helpful not just for our own scripts, but it's also helpful to sit around the table like we're in a room again. Even if we aren't working on a TV show at the time, it's like we are in a room. And so for any writers out there, I would say surround yourself with other writers and, you know, form a writers group. You know, get that feedback, you know, on your scripts. Learn how to take notes from other people. And also just learn how to be in a room and just talk story. Because, you know, that's very important part of the television writing process. That's definitely, I think, is the main thing. You know, you just have to keep writing and, you know, I'm, you know, also looking into other opportunities in terms of where your writing can go. I have a lot of friends who were formerly on staff who now have web series out there and, you know, are getting their name out there with web series. I have a friend who's writing and directing his own feature. So it's definitely important to keep writing those specs and, you know, things like that. But also, you know, I have to remind myself, too, when I first came into this industry, I didn't think of myself as a TV writer. I was, you know, a writer trying to make it in Hollywood. So now that I'm not writing on a television show at the moment, I am a writer working in Hollywood. So that in that, it's kind of freeing and it expands me because, you know what, I'm not just a TV writer. I'm also a feature writer at the moment working on a feature, you know. I'm not just a sitcom writer because I've just finished a pilot of my very first sci-fi hour drama.
Oh, cool.
Which I, you know, yeah, it's very cool. It's an idea that I had that I just really wanted to do, and, but it's kind of that thing where if I was just thinking of myself as a TV sitcom writer, I wouldn't have done it. So, the important thing is just to keep writing, look for, any new opportunities, any different opportunities, and, there are former television writers from the 70s and 80s who are novelists now,
Wow.
So, I mean, Stephen J. Cannell, before he passed away, he was writing novels exclusively. He wasn't even doing television, but, back in the day, all he was the television guy,
Oh, yeah, he was one of the most successful TV show creators.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, but, at some point along the way, he transitioned into solely being a novelist. So I think looking at things like that is just, it helps you as a writer to think, okay, I'm a writer. I'm not just the type of writer that, Hollywood sees me as. You know what I mean? I'm a writer. I can write. As long as you have your imagination, you can write what you want to write.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the fact that even after you had already finished one fellowship and had written for a couple of different shows and even had a couple of produced scripts, you still went to another fellowship. And I'm hearing these stories about people who are even in their 40s who are going to writing fellowships to get sort of a kickstart again. So I know even Jamie Livingston met you at the Pitch Fest. So I appreciate the fact that you're going to these events, you're entering these things, and I think people need to understand that it's not just 22-year-olds that can do that kind of stuff. No,
everything you write is a new opportunity. And that's not even my quote. That's a quote from Jerry Hardwick, who's another former fellow, but also a writer and a feature director and a novelist. And I saw him speak one time on a panel. That's another thing that I do, is I like to hear other writers speak. And it gives me, just inspiration. But I remember him saying that everything you write is a new opportunity. And so I always think about that. Like when I'm not writing even, I'm like, I got to get something else, because that's the thing. You never know, if that script you have that's, dusty and in the drawer, if you pull it out, what opportunities it can create for you. But you can't create anything if you're not writing anything.
Well, and also, too, if you're only focused on, say, for instance, sitcom writing, you're at the mercy of the cyclical schedule. You're at the mercy of staffing season is in May, and then if you don't get staffed or if your show gets canceled, you wait till May again. But if you're writing pilots, if you're writing features, if you're branching out into these other areas, then you can avoid being confined to these cyclical, rigid schedules.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I had to learn that, the hard way. I had to learn that on my own, but that is absolutely true, and that's what made me write my sci-fi 1-hour drama. Just for that reason.
And of course, obviously being active on Twitter and Facebook and the chats and things like that. I'm sure that helps. And by the way, people can find you on Twitter at Tamiko Brooks.
Yes, that is me.
Yeah.
That is me.
Cool. So if you were to meet yourself 15 years ago, or somebody who's just entering the industry now and who wants to break in, what would your advice be to them?
Just take it as it comes, enjoy the ride and keep writing.
Very, very cool. So anything new coming up or anything you want to promote, projects that you're working on?
Nothing to promote at the time. Like I said, I'm really excited about the 1-hour sci-fi drama that I just wrote. Other than that, I'm going to just work on the next pilot idea I have and just keep the ideas pumping. Very,
very cool. Well, I think we'll close it off here, but you've been so generous with your time, and I thank you so much for sharing your path through the industry, and I know it will be very helpful. And so I look forward to seeing you more on Twitter and hearing about the great news when your pilot sells.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Gray.
Cool. Okay, best of luck to you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for scriptwriting information in print and on the web. And by Final Draft scriptwriting software, the entertainment industry standard for scriptwriting worldwide.